It is a new year, and I know all of you are doing fantastic at all your New Year's resolutions. We're only 10 days in, right? So people are still going strong. They got fitness goals and health goals. And
what about the ones, though, that they made it to January 2nd and they just couldn't do it? You can start again tomorrow.
Right? There's always hope.
That's
Every
right.
day is a new day and a fresh beginning. Hey, if you're messing up, start again today. And you know, I know a lot of people are doing things like food cleanses and detox. Those are tough, eh?
They are, and I did a 40-day fast one time and lost a lot of weight, but it also detoxed my body. And I remember going through a book with Bill Bright, and there was actually medical advice in there as well, that when your body is going through, you know, you're depriving it of food. But it was a great experience. Jesus only did it once, and I only plan on doing it once.
That's amazing. Yeah. Kudos to you for 40 days. Well, we're going to talk today about a spiritual cleanse and what that means. I was just in Atlanta with Pastor James Merritt talking about 52 weeks through the Psalms, and he's talking about Psalm 51, cleansing yourself spiritually.
I look forward to that. Our Bible teacher, Robbie Simons, will join us a little bit later in the program. And today you're going to be talking about teen rebellion. Now, Cheryl, I've known you about 10 years, so I didn't know the falling in love with Jesus, amazing follower.
What do you mean, Greg?
Well, you went through just a little teeny-weeny little bit of rebellion, maybe?
I might have been a little bit of a handful as a teenager, but that's all in the past.
That's the past. It's washed away.
But we're going to talk about that today. And you know, if you've ever been a parent for even 5 minutes, you know it's likely one of the toughest things you'll ever do on the face of this earth. And as you watch your children make decisions like I did with their lives, sometimes it's hard not to blame yourself for every one of their failures. But are there things parents can do to help ensure success? Rebecca Gregoire Lindenbach joins me today to talk about the view from the child's perspective and how a parent's approach can help steer kids right. And her mom joins us as well to give the parents' perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here. Yeah.
I can't wait to hear from both of you. We're going to start with you, Rebecca. You wrote this book, Why Kids Didn't Rebel, or Why I Didn't Rebel. You interviewed your friends, you did research, but also you told your own story. So how come you didn't do what I did? How come you didn't rebel?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Right?
It is.
When I started writing this book, I honestly wasn't actually sure what the actual reason was, because it wasn't that there was one thing that made me stay following God's path for my life. It was a really complicated kind of myriad of things that all worked together. And so I really had to tease it apart by doing interviews and really reading back. I even read my old journals to look through my thought process back then. And really what we found is that a lot of the things that helped me and other kids not rebel were not what we're often told in the church is what works. It's actually a little deeper than what we're often told in parenting advice or with the sermons at church. It goes a little deeper.
Well, we want to dive into some of those reasons, but I just want to, Sheila, I want to ask you, and kudos to you too, because your mom's like rather well known,
yes,
you know, as a writer and blogger, and sometimes that makes it harder sometimes for kids not to rebel because it's hard, that public light, that spotlight, that busy life. You wanted her to write this book. Tell me what it was about, you know, what you were hearing from her that made you think, yeah, she needs to let other people know.
Well, it started from a blog post. I have a large blog at To Love, Honor, and Vacuum.com, and I was getting into these fights in the comment section every time I wrote about parenting teens, because I would say things like, you know, here's how to steer kids well, and parents would say, no matter what you do, kids are going to rebel. And I'd be like, oh, that's just so fatalistic. And they wouldn't listen to me. So I said to Rebecca, who was 19 at the time, could you just write me a blog post on why you didn't rebel? And she said no. And then one day she was bored in a stats class at university. She wrote it in 20 minutes. I put it up and it was seen by like 1 million people the next month. Wow. Totally viral.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, good for you. And I hope this does encourage people today. You know, I found it interesting because one of the themes that seemed to be about a lot of things you found was open communication with your parents. Things like respect for your kids, great relationships, explaining why behaviors are wrong, not just demanding obedience from them. So explain to me why a great relationship, open relationship with your parents matters.
Well, I think that often when you look at teenagers as these inevitably rebellious beings, they stop being people a lot of times in our minds, and they start just being this potential disaster.
And sometimes teenagers don't seem like people. Like there's
moments,
my goodness, right?
We're crazy. I say we. I'm not a teenager anymore. I say we, but no, they can be.
There's
really,
moments of craziness, hormonal
crazy,
pure craziness.
But when you're able to get past that and look at them as the person that God has created them to be, we start to shift our mindset, and a lot of that shifts the expectations we have around rebellion. The idea that no, this isn't just a hormone drama-filled 14-year-old. This is also a person who God can use for great things and who has the ability to make good decisions. And that changes how parents interact with their kids, just having that different expectation around behavior.
You talk about that in the book. You expect bad things sometimes. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when you expect kids to step up and they see that belief from you, lots of times they do step up. I think that's so good. And another thing you share in your book is that you struggle with emotional regulation. Like, I think a lot of kids, especially like in that hormone, women especially, 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds, like there's this time of crazy, right? And you would behave sometimes inappropriately or outbursts and things like that. And Sheila, I think about you as a mom, you know, like you can respond, react, I think is the word, as a mom to that, and react wrongly, but you were able to just keep that vision of who she was and not kind of react to that. How did you do that?
Actually, I would say that I didn't. This was one of the areas where I really parented badly, and that's one thing that when Rebecca was writing the book, I said to her, you got to put all the stuff I did wrong in there, like, because this is not about being a perfect parent. Not, you know, raising a kid who doesn't rebel is not about parenting perfectly. It's just about being authentic. And Keith and I, my husband and I, when Rebecca would get moody or when she would have tantrums or just not be able to, she'd be so stressed for an exam, she wouldn't be able to calm down. We didn't handle that well, you know, but in the end, what we could do is we could go say, we're sorry. And wow, did we ever blow that?
That's
you know,
huge.
and she was allowed to say, Mom, you were wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing in a family.
That goes back to that relationship again, that healthy relationship.
Exactly, and that's what I found. I interviewed 25 young adults, both who rebelled and who didn't, and I found that there wasn't a single kid who said, my parents did nothing wrong. It wasn't about never doing anything wrong. It was about how do you handle it when you do something wrong, right? Do you apologize, or do we try to kind of maintain control? Do you go and humble yourself and say, yeah, this was wrong? Now, you screaming at me because you were hormonal and emotional was also wrong, but the way I handled it wasn't beneficial.
And you're modeling how you want your kids to respond back to you by doing it first.
Completely.
I hope a lot of parents just took a deep breath and said, okay, you know, I cannot be perfect and still have good kids. You know, I mean, I think parents need to hear that. That's a message that you need to hear. We have many more tips to unpack for you on how you can steer your kids right in life. Stay with us.
This season, unwrap the gift of family entertainment at PUREFLIX.ca. Enjoy hundreds of Christmas movies from us to you. Start your free month today and discover pure winter movieland at PUREFLIX.ca.
And if you sign up for PureFlix today, you'll get 1 month free. You know, it's a great service that we want to provide here at Crossroads, so you'll be able to see programming that is family friendly, so you can leave the room and not have to worry about what your kids are watching. And also for parents too, I know that when I have those times, just kind of want to relax, take it easy, just turn on the TV and not have to worry about the content. So do that today. And again, when you sign up for PureFlix, you're also supporting all that we do here at Crossroads. Well, let's now continue our conversation on teen rebellion. And Cheryl, back over to you.
We are back with Rebecca Gregoire Lindenbach talking about her book, Why I Didn't Rebel, and her mom, Sheila, rejoins us to unpack some tips for parents. Thanks for coming back, sticking around. You know, Rebecca, I want to talk about faith because, you know, you very clearly say in this book, studies are showing that kids that belong to faith communities do better in life and they don't rebel. And, you know, it's a good positive impact on so many lifestyle things. But there's a caveat. You say they have to own their faith, not just go to church. So what is the difference and how did that work out in your life?
Yeah, well, as I was writing this book, I was thinking about people who I had experienced in the past who grew up and they were the great kids in the youth group. They were involved in everything, but as soon as they became adults, it's like the faith never really stuck. They just kind of left, and it didn't seem to impact them at all. And I was really trying to figure out what the deal was, and it really amplified this difference between treating your family like a team versus treating your family and the church like a club. And it's...
What's the difference between those two?
Well, a club, I'll explain club, you explain team.
Exactly.
Okay, so a club is something where you exist because you like spending time together. And so your identity is in being part of this club, and everything we do is building up the club so that we can do more things. And a lot of times churches are like that. And so kids might be really involved in a church, and parents might be volunteering like crazy in the church, but everything you do seems to be perpetuating the club, so it doesn't really do anything outside of that club. So it doesn't have any bigger, higher purpose.
Like practical life application for your daily life. So if you're building your family as a team and faith, how does that look different?
Well, a team is different from a club because it has a purpose, right? You have a goal that you're working towards. So you need to be equipped. You work on training your players so that they are able to deal with whatever challenges come their way. You know, you do drills if you're on a soccer team. You run all sorts of practices to make sure you're prepared. And it's the same way I found that kids who didn't rebel were not only raised to be good kids, they were raised to be good adults. And that's a very big difference in mindset. Are you preparing kids to simply be a good teenager? Or are we preparing our kids to be responsible when we enter the adult world? But on top of that, probably the most important part is that faith for these families and for families like ours went outside of the four walls of the church. Right? It wasn't just that if we were volunteering, we weren't only volunteering on the worship team and in the nursery. We did that. But we also did things like, I remember growing up, a big tradition for us was we'd get the catalogs where you could, you know, send a goat to a family in somewhere
Cambodia or
somewhere across the world. And every Christmas it was so exciting because we'd get, you know, we'd have a budget that we could donate to all these places. And it's talking about how does the kingdom of God actually impact the world? And how can you be a part of that outside of just the pizza nights and foosball at youth group?
I interview people all the time who have a cultural faith. They grew up and they consider themselves a Christian, but not necessarily have a relationship with Jesus. And sometimes there's this moment where they realize, wait a minute, this is more just my culture than actually how I live. Sheila, what would you say as a parent is the difference between getting your kids to live that faith as opposed to just be part of a culture?
Well, obviously you have to model it, but I think it's more than that. I expected them to know and love God. Like, I remember one of the things I said over and over again when they were teenagers and they had to make a decision was, well, you have the Holy Spirit just as much as I do. So, you know, so God should be able to speak to you. And look at how many times God speaks to teenagers in the Bible. And yet we seem to forget that our kids know God, and I expected them to. And that's a big thing, is expectations, because I think often we expect that kids won't come into their own till they're adults, but I expected them to do things for God, and so they did.
I love that. I see just so many kids that don't find their way. And one thing I really liked about what you did is that you admitted that you don't have all the answers, which is kind of seems like a scary approach. You know, like I think a lot of parents would think my kid's going to walk away because I can't give her everything tied up perfectly. But actually that would create an unrealistic expectation of what it's like to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, and if you look at millennials and Generation Z's, like one of their biggest concerns is social justice and seeing, you know, fixing the problems in the world. And they don't see things in black and white the way that our generation does. And I think when parents expect that their kids will always have a black and white answer to everything, they might do their kids a disservice. So one thing that we did around the dinner table, my husband and Becca would debate all the time. Like, we would debate theology, we would debate everything. And if she could ever stump Keith, like that was great. But we didn't always have to see things exactly the same way as long as we were following Jesus, and that gave them a lot of freedom.
Well, and my dad even said, like, he would say to me, you know, people have been debating theology for 2,000 years. We probably don't have it right today either, right? So it was the different mindset versus you must believe exactly this in order to, like, kind of
Which is another thing you talk about in the book is, like, you know, that kind of rule-driven, only one way kind of thing versus relationship. There's so much more. We're out of time that you can unpack from this book, Why I Didn't Rebel. It's available on our e-store, so if you want to get a copy of it, make sure to go there and check that out. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having us.
And if you're a parent and you need a little encouragement, maybe you have a child like I was, it's a little off the beaten path, and you just want someone to pray with you in agreement, I tell you what, the prayers of my parents are the reason that I am still here on this earth, literally alive. Thank you, Mom and Dad. We would love to pray with you. That number is 1-866-273-4444. We'll be right back.